My name is Diane, and I'm 62 years old, a widow living in Maine. 35 years ago, my late husband Frank and I built our dream country house by the lake with our own hands. It was our sanctuary, our legacy. I never imagined my daughter Alexandra would take those keys and hand them to her in-laws, looking me straight in the eyes saying, "It's theirs, now you have no rights to go there." Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we trust the most. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I handled this heartbreaking situation. Trust me, what happened when they arrived to move in is something you won't want to miss. I met Frank Thompson during my sophomore year of college in 1980. He was studying engineering while I pursued a degree in library science. We were young, ambitious, and deeply in love. After graduation, we married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family present. Frank took a job with a construction company in Portland, Maine, while I worked at the local public library. We saved every penny we could, dreaming of building our own place someday. When I think back to those early years, I remember the small apartment we rented near downtown Portland. It was cramped but cozy, with barely enough room for our second-hand furniture. We'd spend evenings poring over house design magazines, sketching floor plans on napkins, and debating the merits of open-concept living versus traditional layouts. Frank would get so excited talking about load-bearing walls and proper insulation techniques that I couldn't help but fall even more in love with his passion. One day, he'd promise pointing to a particularly beautiful lakeside property in a magazine. "We'll have our own place just like this, maybe even better." After 5 years of saving, we finally had enough for a down payment on a piece of land. It was 5 acres of partially wooded property in rural Maine, about an hour from Portland, with a small natural lake at the edge. The moment we stepped onto that land, we knew it was meant to be ours. The tall pines swayed in the breeze, birds called overhead, and the water sparkled in the sunlight. It wasn't much to look at then, just wild land with no infrastructure, but we could see its potential. "This is it, Dee," Frank said, squeezing my hand as we stood overlooking the water. "This is where we'll build our forever home." Building the house took us 3 years of weekends, holidays, and vacation time. Frank designed it himself, a beautiful 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, large windows to capture the lake view, and enough bedrooms for the family we hoped to have. His colleagues from the construction company would come help with the more complicated aspects, but much of it we did ourselves. I learned to sand floors, stain wood, and even basic plumbing. Frank taught me everything he knew, and we worked side by side until our muscles ached and our hands were calloused. "You're not just building a house," Frank would say when I complained about the endless work. "You're building a home. There's a difference." By the time we moved in, I was pregnant with Alexandra. We finished her nursery first, a sunny room with yellow walls and white curtains that billowed in the summer breeze. Thomas followed 3 years later, completing our family. The house echoed with children's laughter, the patter of little feet on hardwood floors, and the constant chaos of family life. The country house became the center of our world. Every room held memories: the kitchen with its large island where we taught the children to bake cookies, the living room with the stone fireplace where we gathered on cold winter evenings, the dining room where we celebrated every birthday, anniversary, and holiday. Frank built a swing set in the backyard that later gave way to a tree house as the children grew older. I planted a vegetable garden that expanded each year until it took up a significant portion of the backyard. That garden became my passion. I grew everything from tomatoes and cucumbers to exotic herbs and heirloom vegetables. Frank built me raised beds and a small greenhouse for starting seedlings early in the spring. We'd spend hours together out there planting, weeding, and harvesting. The children would help too, albeit reluctantly at times, learning the satisfaction of eating vegetables they'd grown themselves. "This land feeds us," I'd tell them. "We take care of it, and it takes care of us." Summer vacations were spent at the lake, swimming, fishing, and canoeing in the old boat Frank restored. Winter meant sledding down the hill behind the house and ice skating on the frozen lake. Spring brought wildflowers and new beginnings, while autumn transformed our woods into a blaze of red and gold. Every season had its own magic at our country house. As the children grew, their personalities diverged. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, like his father, preferring solitary pursuits, like reading or fishing. Alexandra was more like me, outgoing, ambitious, and always seeking new experiences. From an early age, she displayed a desire for finer things that our modest lifestyle couldn't always provide. "Why can't we go to Disney World like Melissa's family?" she'd ask, or "Why don't we have a pool like the Johnsons?" Frank and I tried to teach both children the value of experiences over possessions, of relationships over status. We emphasized gratitude for what we had, rather than yearning for what we didn't. Thomas seemed to absorb these lessons easily, but they never quite stuck with Alexandra. I won't deny that Frank and I indulged Alexandra more than we should have. She was our firstborn, our beautiful daughter, with her bright blue eyes and winning smile. When she pouted, it was hard to resist giving in. When she excelled in academics, in dance, in debate club, we celebrated her achievements perhaps too enthusiastically. We wanted both our children to feel special and loved, but looking back, I wonder if we created an imbalance without realizing it. "You spoil her," Frank would sometimes say when I gave in to Alexandra's latest request. "I just want her to be happy," I'd reply. "There's a difference between happiness and getting everything you want," he'd remind me, but I didn't always listen. Both children went to college, Alexandra to an expensive private university in Massachusetts that stretched our finances thin, and Thomas to the State University on a partial scholarship. Alexandra studied business and marketing networking with the children of wealthy families and developing a taste for luxury that worried Frank and me. Thomas majored in computer science, quiet and determined, calling home regularly and visiting whenever he could. After graduation, Alexandra moved to Boston and landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm. Thomas headed west to California's tech industry, finding success in a startup that eventually got bought by one of the tech giants. Though he lived far away, Thomas called weekly and visited at least twice a year. Alexandra, despite living much closer, came home less frequently, always citing work commitments or social obligations. Frank retired early at 60, ready to enjoy the country house and property he'd worked so hard to create. We had plans to travel to volunteer to spend more time in the garden. But just 6 months into his retirement, Frank was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start. "Promise me something, Dee," Frank said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake. His body was already growing frail from the chemotherapy. "Promise you'll keep this place in the family. It's not just a house, it's our life's work, our legacy." "I promise," I told him, holding his hand tightly. "This will always be our home." Frank fought hard, but the cancer was relentless. He died at home as he wished, surrounded by family. In his final days, he asked to spend as much time as possible in the garden. When he became too weak to walk, Thomas and I would carry him in a chair to sit among the plants he'd helped nurture for decades. "When I'm gone," he told me privately, "scatter my ashes here. This is where I want to stay." I honored his wish. One crisp autumn morning, with just Thomas and Alexandra present, I scattered Frank's ashes throughout the garden he loved. We planted a young maple tree in his memory at the center of the garden, a living monument to the man who had built so much with his hands and his heart. After Frank died, I split my time between our country house and a small apartment I purchased in Portland to be closer to healthcare and amenities as I aged. The country house was harder to maintain alone, but I couldn't bear to part with it. Every corner held memories of Frank and our life together. The garden especially became my connection to him, a place where I could almost feel his presence as I worked the soil. Financially, we were comfortable. Frank's life insurance combined with our savings and his pension from the construction company left me secure. Both properties were fully paid for removing any financial pressure to sell either one. Thomas urged me to consider moving permanently to Portland as I got older, concerned about me living alone in the rural property, but I resisted. "That house is part of me," I told him. "I'm not ready to let it go." Little did I know that events were already in motion that would challenge my hold on the home. Frank and I had built together, initiated by the daughter we had perhaps loved too blindly. The first time I met Jonathan Harrington, I had reservations. Alexandra brought him to dinner at my Portland apartment about 7 years ago, introducing him as her serious boyfriend. He was handsome in that polished, preppy way, perfectly styled dark hair, expensive watch designer clothes that looked effortlessly casual, but undoubtedly cost more than my monthly pension. "Jonathan's family has been in Boston for generations," Alexandra said, a hint of pride in her voice. "They have a law firm downtown. His father is a senior partner." Jonathan smiled charmingly, shaking my hand with just the right amount of pressure. "Alexandra has told me so much about you, Mrs. Thompson. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Throughout dinner, he was perfectly polite, complimenting my cooking and asking appropriate questions about my life. Yet there was something calculating in his eyes, an assessment taking place behind the pleasant facade. When Alexandra mentioned the country house, Jonathan's interest visibly peaked. 5 acres on a lake in Maine. "That sounds incredible," he said. "My family has a summer home in the Hamptons, but Maine has such unspoiled beauty. We should visit sometime, Alexandra." I invited them both to come the following weekend, eager to see Alexandra more often, and to show Jonathan the home that meant so much to me. When they arrived, Jonathan walked the property with the keen eye of someone appraising its value rather than appreciating its beauty. "Great bones," he commented, running his hand along the porch railing Frank had hand-carved. "Though it could use some updating. My mother works with a fantastic interior designer who did our Beacon Hill home." Less than a year later, they were engaged. The Harrington family hosted an engagement party at their Beacon Hill mansion, a stately brownstone filled with antiques and oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors. I felt immediately out of place among the Boston elite, who filled the rooms discussing boarding schools, yacht clubs, and vacation homes as if these were universal experiences. Eleanor Harrington, Jonathan's mother, was a tall, thin woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the kind of understated jewelry that whispered old money. She greeted me with a cool smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So lovely to meet Alexandra's mother at last," she said, her gaze sweeping over my department store dress. "Alexandra has become quite the addition to our social circle. She's adapting beautifully." William Harrington. Jonathan's father was even more direct. A distinguished man with a commanding presence, he cornered me by the bar. "I understand you have a lovely country property in Maine," he said without preamble. "Waterfront, I hear." "Yes, my late husband and I built it ourselves," I replied, feeling a strange need to establish the provenance of our home. "Built it yourselves?" He raised an eyebrow. "How resourceful. You know, property values in rural Maine have been climbing. Quite the investment opportunity these days." The wedding was an elaborate affair at the Harrington family's country club. Alexandra looked stunning in a designer gown that cost more than my car transformed into someone I barely recognized, poised, sophisticated, and slightly distant. The guest list included state senators, CEOs, and even a minor European royal, while my side consisted of a handful of relatives and old friends who looked as out of place as I felt. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" Alexandra whispered, as we waited for her to walk down the aisle. "I'm going to be a Harrington." The way she said the name, with such reverence, made my heart sink. It was as if becoming a Thompson had been merely a starting point, and becoming a Harrington was the real achievement. After the wedding, Alexandra and Jonathan moved into a luxury apartment in an exclusive Boston neighborhood. I saw less and less of my daughter as she embraced her new life among Boston's social elite. Our phone calls became infrequent, her visits rare. When I did see her, she would casually mention charity, Gala's weekend trips to New York, or dinners with important business connections. "Eleanor has been introducing me to everyone who matters in Boston," she told me during one of her brief visits. "It's all about who you know in this world, Mom. The Harringtons know everyone." When Alexandra announced her pregnancy a year into the marriage, I was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. I offered to come stay with them after the baby was born to help, as my own mother had done for me, but Alexandra demurred. "Eleanor has already arranged for the best night nurse in Boston," she said, "and their housekeeper will be helping with everything else. But thanks for offering, Mom." Emily was born in the spring, a beautiful, healthy baby girl with Alexandra's blue eyes. I flew to Boston immediately, but was allowed only brief visits at designated times, slotted between the parade of Harrington relatives and family friends bearing expensive gifts. I brought a hand-knitted blanket I'd worked on throughout Alexandra's pregnancy, only to notice it was nowhere to be seen in the elegantly appointed nursery. "Oh, we're using the organic bamboo bedding Eleanor's designer selected," Alexandra explained when I asked. "But thank you for the thought." 2 years later, James joined the family, a serious little boy who resembled Jonathan. By then, Alexandra was complaining about their apartment being too small for a family of 4. "We're on the waiting list for a unit in the new luxury building on Commonwealth Avenue," she told me. "But it's at least a year wait. The housing market in Boston is so competitive." It was during this period that Alexandra first mentioned using the country house as a weekend retreat for her family. "It would be perfect, Mom," she said during one of her rare visits to Maine. "The kids could experience nature, Jonathan could unwind from work, and we'd have space to breathe until we find our permanent home in Boston." I was thrilled at the prospect of having Alexandra and my grandchildren spend more time at the lake house. Though I split my time between Portland and the country house, I offered to coordinate so they could use it whenever they wanted. "Bring the children here any time," I told her eagerly. "I'd love for them to grow up knowing this place like you did." The first weekend they came to stay, I prepared everything meticulously, stocking the refrigerator with their favorite foods, setting up the old nursery with toys and books for Emily and James, and making sure the house was spotless. I even put fresh flowers from the garden in every room. What I hadn't expected was that Jonathan's parents would join them. Eleanor Harrington stepped into my home with the air of someone conducting an inspection, her critical gaze taking in every detail. "It's very rustic," she commented, running a finger along the farmhouse table Frank had built. "Authentic country living, I suppose." William Harrington was more blunt. "This kitchen needs a complete overhaul, and these floors, they're original." "Yes," I said proudly. "Frank milled some of the wood himself from trees on our property." He replied, looking unimpressed. "No central air conditioning either, I notice." That evening after dinner, I stepped onto the back porch for some air and overheard a conversation through the open window of the living room where the Harringtons were having drinks. "This place has such potential," Eleanor was saying. "With the right renovations, it could be a showpiece. That lake view is wasted with the current layout." "We're thinking of gutting it entirely," Jonathan replied. "Start fresh with a modern design that maximizes the waterfront setting." "The property value alone makes it worth the investment," William added. "Lakefront acreage like this doesn't come on the market often. Once Alexandra convinces her mother to sell..." I stepped away, not wanting to hear more, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I noticed light from the garden shed. Looking out the window, I saw William Harrington with a flashlight, seemingly examining the property lines, taking notes on his phone. After they left that Sunday, I discovered several items missing. Family photos had been removed from walls, some of Frank's books had disappeared from shelves, and a small antique side table was nowhere to be found. When I called Alexandra to ask about it, she brushed off my concerns. "We're just making a little space, Mom. That old table was taking up room we needed for the children's play area. And honestly, some of those old photos are a bit dated for the aesthetic we're trying to create." Over the next few months, this pattern continued. Each time Alexandra's family visited, more of my and Frank's possessions would vanish, replaced by new modern items I didn't recognize. The bookshelves Frank had built were removed entirely, replaced by sleek, floating shelves that looked out of place in the rustic setting. The comfortable old sofa where we had spent countless evenings was replaced by a designer piece that looked beautiful, but was uncomfortable to sit on. One day, while cleaning after they had left, I found a folded paper that had fallen behind the desk in what used to be Frank's study. Unfolding it, I discovered architectural drawings for a complete redesign of the house. Walls moved, the entire kitchen relocated, and most disturbingly, the back garden where Frank's ashes were scattered was marked for conversion to a pool, an outdoor entertainment area. Alarmed, I called Thomas in California that evening, sharing my concerns about what seemed to be happening. "I think Alexandra and the Harringtons are planning to take over the house," I told him. "They keep asking about the deed, about my will, about whether I've considered estate planning. And they're already changing everything, Thomas. Your father's garden. They want to put a swimming pool there." Thomas was immediately concerned. "Have you signed anything, Mom? Any papers at all?" "Just a power of attorney form Alexandra brought over last year," I said, recalling the document she'd presented during a brief visit. "She said it was just in case of emergency so she could make decisions for me if I had a health crisis." "Send me a copy of that immediately," Thomas insisted, his voice tight with worry. "And don't sign anything else. I'm coming home next week. We need to figure this out." Before Thomas could arrive, however, events accelerated in a way I never could have anticipated. The first concrete sign of trouble came on a chilly October afternoon. I had driven up to the country house to check on things after a storm, planning to stay the weekend. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed unfamiliar stakes with orange flags placed throughout the garden, the kind surveyors use to mark boundaries or planned construction. Walking the property, I discovered more disturbing changes. Several of Frank's beloved old oak trees had been marked with orange spray paint, typically indicating planned removal. The shed where we kept our gardening tools had been emptied, the tools replaced with expensive new equipment, still in packaging. And most upsetting of all, the raised garden beds where Frank's ashes had been scattered had been partially dismantled, the soil disturbed. With shaking hands, I called Alexandra. "What's happening at the house?" I demanded when she answered. "Why are there survey stakes all over the garden?" "Oh, that," she said, her voice casual. "Jonathan's parents have a landscape architect drawing up plans for renovations. It's just preliminary marking, nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about, Alexandra. They're planning to remove trees that your father planted. And the garden beds. Do you realize that's where your father's ashes are scattered?" "Mom," she sighed as if explaining something to a child. "It's been 5 years. We can't keep the property frozen in time like some sort of shrine. The Harringtons are investing a lot in these improvements. They're even paying for everything themselves." Investing? It's not their house to invest in. This is my home, Alexandra, mine and your father's. Look, we need to have a serious conversation about the future of that property. Jonathan and I think it would make more sense for us to take over ownership. You're alone now, splitting time between 2 homes. It's a lot for someone your age to manage. Her words felt like a slap. Someone my age, I'm 62, not 92, I'm perfectly capable of managing my own property. We should discuss this in person, she said firmly. Why don't you come to dinner at our place next Friday? Jonathan's parents will be there and we can talk through everything like adults. I agreed mostly because I wanted to understand exactly what they were planning. After hanging up, I walked through the house, really seeing it through fresh eyes. So many things had already changed. The warm, comfortable home Frank and I had created was being systematically transformed into something colder, more sterile. Designer furnishings that didn't match the rustic architecture. Artwork that meant nothing to me. Even the family photos had been replaced with artfully arranged professional portraits of Alexandra, Jonathan, and the children. In the master bedroom, I noticed Frank's old dresser was missing, replaced by a modern credenza. Opening the closet, I discovered most of my clothes were gone with just a few items remaining. The bathroom had been completely redone in sleek marble and glass, all our old fixtures removed. It was as if they were erasing us. Erasing Frank, erasing me, erasing our history, and replacing it with their vision of what the house should be. I sat on the edge of the bed, a new bed I didn't recognize, and cried for the first time since realizing something was wrong. This wasn't just about property. It was about legacy, about memory, about respect. The week until the dinner in Boston passed in a blur of anxiety and planning. I spoke with Thomas daily, and he moved his flight earlier, promising to meet me at Alexandra's for the dinner. I spent hours looking through our files, finding the deed to the property, Frank's will, and other important documents. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The house was legally mine, left to me outright in Frank's will, with no encumbrances or restrictions. When Friday arrived, I dressed carefully in one of my nicer outfits, not to impress the Harringtons, but to armor myself with confidence. Thomas met me outside Alexandra's building, giving me a fierce hug. "I've got your back, Mom," he whispered, "no matter what happens in there." Alexandra's apartment was immaculate, as always, decorated in the neutral palette that Eleanor Harrington favored. My grandchildren were nowhere to be seen, presumably with a sitter for the evening. The Harringtons were already there when we arrived, cocktails in hand, dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a family dinner. "Diane, how lovely to see you," Eleanor said with her practiced smile. "And Thomas, what a surprise. Alexandra didn't mention you'd be joining us." "Last-minute decision," Thomas replied coolly. "I wanted to be part of this family discussion." Dinner was a tense affair. We made stilted small talk through the appetizer and main course, carefully avoiding any mention of the country house until Alexandra signaled to their housekeeper to bring coffee and dessert. "I think it's time we discuss the main property," William Harrington said, once the coffee was served, shifting smoothly into what I recognized as his boardroom manner. "We've had some preliminary plans drawn up that I think you'll find quite impressive, Diane." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were professional architectural renderings, showing a completely transformed property. The farmhouse-style home Frank and I had built was gone, replaced by a modern glass and steel structure. The garden had been replaced with a pool and extensive stone patio. Even the shoreline had been altered with a large dock and boathouse. "This isn't a renovation," I said quietly. "This is a complete demolition and rebuild. This isn't our house at all." "That's rather the point," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "The current structure, while charming in its way, simply doesn't meet the standards of a proper vacation home. The location is the real value." "We're prepared to manage the entire project," William continued as if I hadn't spoken. "All the costs permits construction management. And of course, you'd be welcome to visit any time, Diane." "Visit my own home?" I looked at Alexandra, who was studiously avoiding my gaze. "Alexandra, what is going on here?" Alexandra finally looked up, her expression a mixture of determination and defiance. "Mom, we've already started the process. I've been talking with an attorney using the power of attorney you signed. The property is being transferred to Jonathan and me with his parents as co-owners since they're financing the rebuild." "What?" I gasped, unable to believe what I was hearing. "I never authorized that. That power of attorney was for health decisions, not for you to steal my property." "No one is stealing anything," Jonathan said smoothly. "This is a family matter being handled within the family. The power of attorney Alexandra has is quite comprehensive." Thomas leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. "May I see this power of attorney?" Alexandra hesitated, then reached into a drawer in the sideboard, pulling out a document. Thomas took it, scanning the pages with increasing alarm. "Mom, this isn't the document you described to me. This is a general durable power of attorney giving Alexandra authority over all your financial and legal affairs. When did you sign this?" I signed what Alexandra brought me last year. She said it was just for medical emergencies." "She told you that, but that's not what this is," Thomas said grimly. "Did you read it before signing?" I flushed with embarrassment. She caught me as I was rushing out to a doctor's appointment. I trusted her. "Well, it's all perfectly legal," William Harrington interjected. "Alexandra has the authority to make this transfer, and it's already in process. The paperwork should be finalized next week." "No," I said, finding my voice. "I never intended to give Alexandra that kind of authority, and I certainly never intended to give away my home. Frank and I built that house. His ashes are scattered in that garden you want to bulldoze for a swimming pool." "Mom, be reasonable," Alexandra sighed. "It's just a house, and it's too much for you to maintain at your age. You're being selfish holding onto a property that could benefit your grandchildren." "Selfish for wanting to keep my own home." I was incredulous. "The home your father and I built with our own hands. The home where you grew up." "It's more than just the house," Jonathan added. "It's about providing opportunities for Emily and James. My parents' anniversary is coming up, and we wanted to surprise them with this property. They've always wanted a lakefront home in Maine." "So you're taking my house to give to your parents as an anniversary gift?" The absurdity of it struck me hard. Alexandra's expression hardened. "The decision's been made, Mom. It's theirs. Now you have no rights to go there. We're planning to renovate it completely for Jonathan's parents' anniversary." In that moment, looking at my daughter's cold expression, I barely recognized the child I had raised. How had we come to this? How had my sweet little girl transformed into someone who could steal her father's legacy without remorse? "I need to use the restroom," I said, standing shakily. Thomas squeezed my arm in support as I left the table. In the hallway, I paused, hearing Emily's voice from the children's bedroom where they were supposedly asleep. Peeking in, I saw my 4-year-old granddaughter playing with a dollhouse, a miniature replica of our country house as it used to be before all the changes. "Grandma's house," she was saying to her dolls, moving them through the tiny rooms, "where the flowers grow and the birds sing." My heart cracked. At least someone in this family still remembered what that house truly was. Returning to the dining room, I found the conversation had continued without me, the Harringtons discussing demolition timelines and contractor recommendations. Thomas was sitting rigidly, his face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," I said calmly as I retook my seat. "That power of attorney was obtained under false pretenses. I'll be contacting an attorney of my own first thing Monday morning." "Don't be dramatic, Diane," Eleanor scoffed. "This is a family matter that should stay within the family. Legal battles are so unseemly." "What's unseemly is stealing a widow's home," Thomas snapped. "A home that has been in our family for 35 years. "No one is stealing anything," William repeated, his tone condescending. "This is a business transaction handled properly through legal channels. Alexandra has the authority and she's exercising it. I suggest you both accept that gracefully." Alexandra stood abruptly. This conversation is over. The paperwork is being filed Monday. The property will be transferred to us, and we'll begin renovations immediately. The contractors are already scheduled to start demolition next week. Demolition. I whispered the word, hitting me like a physical blow. Yes, Mom. The structure isn't salvageable for what we need. It's going to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. We're already having the furniture we want to keep moved to storage this weekend. As if on cue, a small voice came from the doorway. Mommy, why is Grandma crying? Emily stood there in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed bear Frank had given her on her first birthday. Alexandra quickly crossed the room, picking her up. It's nothing, sweetie, grown-up talk. Let's get you back to bed. I want to go to Grandma's lake house, Emily said sleepily, where Grandpa's flowers are. Alexandra's expression tightened as she carried Emily from the room, ignoring the child's request. When she returned, her resolve seemed even firmer. I think it's time for you both to leave, she said. We'll be going to the house tomorrow to oversee the moving company. Everything will be handled professionally, so there's no need for either of you to be there. Alexandra, I said, finding a calm I didn't know I possessed. You're making a terrible mistake. Not just legally, but morally. Your father would be heartbroken to see this. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a glimmer of the daughter I once knew, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the hard determination I'd come to recognize. Goodbye, Mom, she said firmly. We'll be in touch after everything is settled. As Thomas and I left the apartment, I felt strangely numb. The betrayal was so complete, so unexpected, despite the warning signs that it didn't seem real. In the elevator, Thomas put his arm around me. We'll fight this, he promised. First thing Monday morning, we're getting a lawyer. That power of attorney was obtained through deception. We can challenge it. I nodded, but wondered if it would be too late. If the demolition was scheduled to begin next week, what would be left to save? The most important thing is to act quickly. Margaret Sullivan told us Monday morning, peering at us over her reading glasses. Her office was cluttered but organized bookshelves, overflowing with legal texts, certificates covering one wall, attesting to her 50 years of practicing law in Maine. Margaret had been a friend of Frank's since high school, and though semi-retired now, she had agreed to see us immediately when Thomas called, explaining the situation. At 75, she was sharp as ever, taking detailed notes as we explained everything that had happened. This power of attorney, she said, examining the document Thomas had managed to photograph at the dinner, was clearly obtained under false pretenses. Diane, you say Alexandra explicitly told you it was for medical decisions only. Absolutely, I confirmed. She caught me as I was heading out the door to a doctor's appointment. She said it was just in case something happened to me so she could make medical decisions. I was running late and I trusted her. Margaret's expression softened briefly before returning to professional focus. That's misrepresentation, and the fact that she's using it to transfer property to herself represents a clear conflict of interest. We have grounds to challenge this. But will we be in time? Thomas asked anxiously. They're planning to start demolition this week. The moving company was supposed to be there yesterday. Let me make some calls, Margaret said, reaching for her phone. We need to get an emergency injunction to stop any changes to the property until this is resolved. While Margaret worked the phone, Thomas stepped out to make some calls of his own. When he returned, his expression was grim. I just spoke to Mr. Peterson, he said, referring to our longtime neighbor at the lake house. He says there are several large moving trucks at the property right now, and a construction crew is marking things for demolition. My heart sank. They're not wasting any time. There's more, Thomas continued. I did some digging into Jonathan's financial situation. It seems he's not doing as well at the family firm as they make it appear. There are rumors of some poor investment decisions, client losses. I think he may be in financial trouble. Which would explain the rush to get control of a valuable lakefront property, Margaret observed, hanging up her phone. I've spoken with Judge Harmon. He's an old friend and he's agreed to see us immediately about an emergency injunction. But we need to get to the property now before anything irreversible happens. What about the power of attorney? I asked. I've drafted a revocation, Margaret said, handing me a document. Sign this immediately. It formally revokes any previous power of attorney you've granted. We'll file it with the court today, but you should also deliver it in person. I signed where indicated my hand steadier than I expected. Something had shifted inside me during that dinner at Alexandra's. The shock and hurt remained, but they were now accompanied by a steely resolve I hadn't felt in years. What's our next step? Thomas asked. We go to the house, Margaret said simply, gathering her papers. Now, I've called the county sheriff to meet us there. If they're removing property or beginning demolition without legal authority, that's trespassing and destruction of property. The drive to the country house took just over an hour, but it felt like the longest journey of my life. Thomas drove with Margaret in the passenger seat, reviewing legal documents while I sat in the back, alternating between anxiety and anger. How had it come to this? My own daughter stealing my home planning to erase every trace of her father's work of our family's history. For what? To impress her in-laws, to solve her husband's financial problems. The Alexandra I raised would never have done something so heartless. As we turned onto the long driveway leading to the house, I gasped. 3 large moving trucks were parked in front, along with several expensive cars I recognized as belonging to the Harringtons. A team of workers was carrying furniture and boxes out of the house, while men in hard hats consulted blueprints near the garden. Thomas parked behind a sheriff's cruiser that had just arrived. Deputy Collins, a man I recognized from community events over the years, was stepping out of his vehicle. Mrs. Thompson. He greeted me with a respectful nod. Got a call about a potential property dispute here. These people are removing items from my home without permission. I told him, my voice stronger than I expected, and they're planning unauthorized demolition and construction. Do you have proof of ownership? He asked. Margaret stepped forward, introducing herself and presenting the property, deed, and other documents. Mrs. Thompson is the sole legal owner of this property. She has not authorized any removal of possessions or any construction work. Deputy Collins reviewed the documents, then nodded. Let me talk to the people in charge here. We followed him toward the house where Alexandra and Jonathan were directing the moving crew. Eleanor and William Harrington stood nearby, looking pleased as workers carried out antique pieces that had been in my family for generations. Mrs. Harrington, Deputy Collins called, and both Eleanor and Alexandra turned a small detail that spoke volumes about how Alexandra now saw herself. What's going on here? Alexandra demanded when she spotted us. Mom, what are you doing? I might ask you the same thing, I replied calmly. This is my house, and you're removing my possessions without permission. I have power of attorney, Alexandra said dismissively, turning to the deputy. I have legal authority to manage my mother's affairs, including this property. We're in the process of a legal transfer of ownership. Not anymore, Margaret interjected, stepping forward. Mrs. Thompson has revoked your power of attorney effective immediately. I've filed the revocation with the court this morning. She handed copies of the revocation to Alexandra Jonathan and Deputy Collins. Alexandra's face flushed with anger as she scanned the document. This doesn't change anything, Jonathan said smoothly. The property transfer is already in process. A transfer initiated through a power of attorney obtained by misrepresentation and used in clear conflict of interest, Margaret countered. We've already spoken with Judge Harmon, who has agreed to hear our petition for an emergency injunction this afternoon. Deputy Collins, who had been reviewing the documents and listening carefully, turned to the Harringtons. Until this legal matter is resolved, I'm going to have to ask you to halt all removal of property and any construction or demolition activities. This is ridiculous, William Harrington blustered. We have contracts with these moving companies and construction crews. Delaying will cost thousands. That's not my concern, sir, Deputy Collins replied evenly. My job is to prevent any potentially illegal removal of property. Based on these documents, Mrs. Thompson is the legal owner of this property and everything in it. Alexandra, I said, turning to my daughter, whose face was a mixture of anger and disbelief. Why? Why would you do this to me, to your father's memory? For a moment she seemed at a loss for words. Then Jonathan stepped in his hand possessively on her shoulder. This isn't personal, Diane. It's a practical solution. You're getting older. This property is too much for you to maintain, and we can put it to better use. The Harrington family has a legacy to uphold. What about our legacy, so? Thomas interjected, gesturing around us. Dad built this house. His ashes are scattered in that garden you want to bulldoze. Does that mean nothing to you, Alexandra? A small voice suddenly piped up from behind us. Grandma. Emily broke away from her nanny, who had been trying to keep the children by the cars, and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my legs. James followed more slowly, thumb in his mouth, watching the adults with wide eyes. Are we staying at your house, Grandma? Emily asked excitedly. Can we see Grandpa's garden? I knelt down to hug her properly, fighting back tears. I hope so, sweetheart. Alexandra moved to retrieve her daughter, but Emily clung to me. I want to stay with Grandma, she insisted. Eleanor Harrington stepped forward, her voice cold. Alexandra, control your child. This scene is unseemly. Emily, come here now, Alexandra commanded, but there was a slight tremor in her voice I hadn't heard before. Emily looked up at me with Frank's blue eyes. Why is Mommy angry? Don't they like your house, Grandma? The simple question hung in the air, cutting through the tension. Even Alexandra seemed momentarily taken aback. Your grandmother's house is very special, Thomas said, kneeling beside us. Your grandpa built it with his own hands, and we want to keep it just the way it is. Deputy Collins cleared his throat. I need everyone to clear the property except for the legal owner until this matter is resolved. The moving and construction crews need to leave immediately. This is outrageous, William Harrington exploded. I'll have your badge for this. Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, sir, you've made that quite clear, Deputy Collins replied dryly. But in this county, property rights are property rights regardless of who you are. As the workers began reluctantly packing up their equipment, Jonathan pulled Alexandra aside. Their heated whispers carried in the tense silence, with Jonathan gesturing angrily and Alexandra's shoulders gradually slumping. Finally, Alexandra broke away and approached me, her expression conflicted. Can we talk privately? I nodded, and we walked a short distance toward the lake, away from the others. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the water where she had learned to swim, where we had spent countless summer days as a family. Jonathan's in trouble, she finally said, her voice low. Financial trouble. Bad investments clients leaving the firm. His parents have been covering for him, but they're running out of patience. They wanted this property, said it could be Jonathan's chance to redeem himself in the family, develop it, flip it for a profit. So you decided to steal it from me? I asked, the hurt evident in my voice. I didn't see it that way, she said defensively. I convinced myself it was better for everyone. You're getting older. The property is a lot to maintain, and we could put it to better use. Better use than preserving your father's legacy, than keeping his final resting place intact. She had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't think about it that way. I just saw an opportunity to solve our problems and impress the Harringtons. At the expense of your own family, I said quietly. Alexandra, what happened to you? This isn't how we raised you. I wanted to belong, she admitted, and for a moment I saw vulnerability in her eyes. The Harringtons have everything, status, connections, respect. When I married Jonathan, I thought I'd finally have all that too, but it's never enough. There's always another test to pass, another standard to meet. And stealing your mother's home was going to pass their test? I asked. She looked away. Jonathan said it would prove my loyalty to the family, show that I was truly a Harrington, not just a Thompson girl who married in. The admission hung between us, revealing the sad truth of what her marriage had become. Not a partnership, but a constant striving for approval from people who would never truly accept her. "Alexandra," I said gently, "no house, no status, no amount of money is worth losing yourself or sacrificing your integrity." A tear slipped down her cheek. "It's too late. I've already chosen my side." "It's never too late to do the right thing," I told her, echoing words Frank had often said to our children. Our conversation was interrupted by raised voices. Turning, we saw Jonathan in a heated argument with his father, while Thomas stood nearby with Margaret Deputy Collins, watching the scene carefully. "You promised this would be handled cleanly," William was saying, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Now we have legal complications, potential scandal. This reflects poorly on the Harrington name, Jonathan." "I'm handling it, Father," Jonathan insisted, though his confident facade was cracking. "Alexandra has the power of attorney. We can challenge this revocation." "And bring more attention to how that power was obtained," William scoffed. "No, this is yet another failure on your part. First the Westbrook account, now this debacle." As we approached, William turned to Alexandra. "Fix this," he commanded, "whatever it takes. The Harrington family cannot be associated with property disputes and sheriff interventions. It's vulgar." Emily had wandered over to the garden during the commotion and was now crouched by one of the raised beds, examining the flowers that still bloomed there despite the autumn chill. "Grandma, are these Grandpa's flowers?" she called. "Mommy says Grandpa lives in the flowers now." Alexandra froze her eyes, meeting mine. In that moment, something seemed to shift in her expression. "Yes, Emily," she said quietly. "That's where Grandpa's ashes were scattered, where he wanted to stay forever." Jonathan looked at his wife sharply. "Alexandra, don't get sentimental now. We have a situation to resolve." But Alexandra was watching as Emily gently touched a late-blooming daisy, talking softly to it as if communicating with her grandfather. James had joined his sister solemnly, placing a small stone as an offering on the garden bed. "I can't do this," Alexandra suddenly said, her voice breaking. "I can't destroy Dad's garden. I can't take Mom's house. I just can't." Jonathan grabbed her arm, pulling her aside. "What are you saying? We've already set everything in motion. My parents are counting on this property." "It's wrong," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It was wrong from the beginning and I knew it. I wanted to please you, to please them." She gestured toward her in-laws. "But not like this. Not by betraying my own family." Eleanor Harrington stepped forward, her expression icy. "Alexandra, compose yourself. This emotional display is inappropriate. We'll discuss this privately." "No," Alexandra said, pulling away from Jonathan. "We've done enough behind closed doors. Mom," she turned to me, tears now flowing freely. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong, so wrong. The power of attorney, the plans for the house, all of it." The admission hung in the air, a moment of truth that seemed to stop time itself. Deputy Collins cleared his throat. "Given this admission, I think it's clear who has legal right to this property," he said. "Mrs. Thompson, do you want these people to leave?" I looked at my daughter's tear-streaked face, at my grandchildren playing innocently in Frank's garden, at the moving trucks, filled with my possessions, at the Harringtons' cold, angry expressions. Then I looked at Thomas, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Yes," I said firmly, "everyone except my family needs to leave immediately, and I want everything that's been removed returned to the house." "You'll regret this," William Harrington threatened, but his words held no power now. As the moving crews began reluctantly unloading the trucks returning furniture and boxes to the house, Alexandra stood apart from Jonathan and his parents, her arms wrapped around herself, as if cold, despite the mild day. "What happens now?" she asked quietly when I approached her. "That depends on you," I told her honestly, "on whether this moment of truth is real or just another performance." She looked at her children still playing in the garden, then back at me. "It's real," she whispered. "I don't know what happens next, but I know I can't keep doing this, being someone I'm not, betraying the people who truly love me." Jonathan called her name sharply, gesturing for her to join him and his parents as they prepared to leave. Alexandra took a deep breath, then said words I never expected to hear. "I think the children and I will stay here tonight, Jonathan. We need some time apart to figure things out." The shock on his face mirrored my own surprise. This was not the daughter who had been systematically erasing me from my own home. This was someone new, or perhaps someone rediscovered. As Jonathan and his parents drove away their expensive cars, kicking up dust on the driveway, Alexandra turned to face me, Thomas, and her children, looking both lost and determined. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said simply, "but I'd like a chance to try to make things right." Thomas put his arm around me, supportive but letting me make the decision. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw beneath the polished exterior to the girl who had once helped Frank plant sunflowers in this very garden, who had once known what truly mattered. "We have a lot to talk about," I said finally. "But first, why don't we show Emily and James their grandfather's garden properly? It's where our family story lives." Taking her hesitant nod as acceptance, I held out my hand. After a moment's pause, Alexandra took it, and together we walked toward the children, toward the flowers Frank had planted, toward whatever new understanding might grow from this broken ground. 6 months have passed since that day when Alexandra chose family over facade, when she stood in Frank's garden and rediscovered something of herself that had been buried beneath years of striving for approval from people who would never truly give it. In that time, much has changed, for all of us. The legal matters were settled relatively quickly. Margaret helped me file for formal revocation of the power of attorney, which was granted without contest when Alexandra submitted a written statement admitting she had misrepresented its purpose. The attempted property transfer was voided, and the deed remains securely in my name. What happened with the Harringtons was more complicated and painful. Jonathan initially tried to convince Alexandra to return to Boston to apologize to his parents and resume their life as if nothing had happened. When she refused, the true nature of their relationship became clear. "They've cut us off," Alexandra told me one evening as we sat on the porch watching Emily and James chase fireflies in the twilight. "Financially, socially, completely. Jonathan's been removed from the family firm. His father says he'll be reinstated only if he divorces me." "What will he do?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "He's considering it." She admitted, her voice small but steady. "He says he doesn't know who he is without the Harrington name and connections. I told him I finally know who I am because I stepped away from them." A month later, Jonathan filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Alexandra didn't contest it. Instead, with Thomas's help, she found a small house to rent in Portland, enrolled Emily in a good public school, and began looking for work. The marketing skills she'd developed in Boston served her well, and she soon found a position with a local company that allowed her flexible hours to be with the children. "It's not the life I thought I'd have," she told me one day as we planted spring bulbs in Frank's garden. "But it's real. I'm not pretending anymore." Thomas, ever the supportive son, flew back and forth from California regularly during those first difficult months. Eventually, he made a surprising announcement. "I've requested a transfer to the East Coast office," he told us over dinner at my Portland apartment. "It's time to come home. Family should be together." With both my children now within driving distance, we established a new routine. Sunday dinners at my apartment in Portland, alternate weekends at the country house where Emily and James could roam the woods and swim in the lake as their mother and uncle had done at their age. Alexandra and I spent long hours talking, working through the hurt and betrayal, finding our way back to trust. "I was so lost," she confessed during one of these conversations. "So desperate to be accepted by the Harringtons that I was willing to sacrifice everything real, you, Dad's memory, my own integrity. It seems impossible now that I could have been so blind." "We all lose our way sometimes," I told her, thinking of Frank and how he would have handled this situation. "The important thing is finding your way back." As for the country house, it remains much as Frank and I designed it, though, with some sensible updates. Thomas helped install a new heating system to make winter stays more comfortable. Alexandra and I repainted some rooms, choosing colors together that honored the original character while freshening the space. The garden has been fully restored, with Emily taking a special interest in helping maintain the beds where her grandfather's ashes rest. "Is Grandpa really in the flowers?" she asked me one afternoon as we planted marigolds together. "In a way," I explained. "His ashes are in the soil, helping the flowers grow. So whenever you see something beautiful growing here, a little bit of Grandpa helped make that happen." She considered this with the serious contemplation only a 5-year-old can muster. "Then we have to take very good care of the garden," she decided. "It's Grandpa's home." Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom we adults sometimes forget. Last month I met with my attorney again. Not Margaret this time, but a younger specialist in estate planning, whom she recommended. Together we crafted a new will that reflects my wishes for the future of the property Frank and I loved so much. The country house will pass equally to Thomas and Alexandra upon my death, with specific provisions to protect the garden and the overall character of the property. Most importantly, the will stipulates that the house cannot be sold out of the family for at least 2 generations, ensuring that Emily, James, and any children Thomas might have will always have this connection to their roots. "It's more than fair," Alexandra said when I explained the provisions. "More than I deserve after what I tried to do." "It's not about deserving," I told her. "It's about preserving what matters. This house was always meant to be a family legacy, not an asset to be developed or flipped for profit." Last weekend, we all gathered at the country house for a special occasion: the dedication of a small memorial bench we placed in the garden, overlooking Frank's favorite view of the lake. Thomas had it made by a local craftsman using wood from one of the old oak trees that had fallen during a storm last winter. A simple plaque reads, "Frank Thompson. He built this place with love. May his memory continue to grow here." As we sat on the new bench, the late afternoon sun warming our faces, Emily leaned against me. "Grandma, tell us again how you and Grandpa built this house," she requested. And so I began the story once more. The story of 2 young people with dreams, bigger than their bank account of weekends, spent hammering and painting of the day we finally moved in of the family we raised within these walls. Alexandra and Thomas added their own memories. The tree house Frank built them, the massive snowman we all constructed one Christmas, the way the house always smelled like cinnamon and coffee on Sunday mornings. "I wish I could have met Grandpa," James said softly, surprising us all as he's usually the quiet one. "You have," Alexandra told him, putting her arm around his small shoulders. "Every time you're in this garden, every time you swim in this lake, every time you hear our stories about him. That's how we keep people with us, even after they're gone." In that moment, watching my daughter pass on this wisdom to her son, I felt Frank's presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside us on the bench. This is what he and I had worked so hard to create, not just a house, but a home. A place where family stories would be told and retold, where memories would be made and cherished, where his legacy would live on in the children and grandchildren who gathered here. The house itself matters, yes. It's the physical manifestation of our dreams and efforts. But what matters more is what happens within its walls and on its grounds. The relationships healed here, the lessons learned, the love that, despite everything, remained strong enough to overcome even the deepest betrayal. Alexandra is not the same daughter who tried to take my home. She's someone both new and familiar, humbler, more authentic, more like the girl Frank and I raised before the world's expectations led her astray. Thomas continues to be our family's steady center, the peacemaker, the one who sees what needs to be done and quietly does it. And my grandchildren are growing into this legacy, learning its value not in dollars but in the sense of belonging it provides. As for me, I've learned that sometimes you have to stand firm to protect what matters, even when doing so feels like standing against those you love. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean making space for new beginnings. And I've learned that Frank was right all those years ago. We weren't just building a house, we were building a home. The difference, as it turns out, is everything. Have you ever had to fight to protect something precious to you, even from those you love, or found the strength to forgive a deep betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family forgiveness and finding your way back to what truly matters. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of healing and hope, share this video with them. Sometimes the stories we tell become bridges that help others cross their own troubled waters. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that homes, like hearts, can be broken but also mended. And sometimes what emerges after the breaking is stronger and more beautiful than before.